They said time was money, but for Julian Vance, time was memory. On a cold Thursday morning, Julian sat alone in the back seat of his sleek black limousine, the city skyline slicing through the misted windows. In his hand, he cradled a delicate pocket watch, gold-plated, heavy, and old. It was the only thing he still carried from his childhood, and that morning, for the first time in years, it had stopped ticking. He turned it over in his palm. The second's hand stood still, stubborn and silent, like a locked door refusing to open. He tapped it, shook it. Nothing. "Would you like me to call your regular jeweler, sir?" asked his assistant from the front. Julian didn't answer. Instead, he stared out the window, his eyes narrowing at the passing streets. Something in him didn't want the watch touched by another high-end technician wearing gloves and a tie. That watch was different, personal, sacred, and if it was going to be brought back to life, it had to be somewhere far from the noise of his world. "Driver," he said suddenly, "turn left, just keep driving." 15 minutes later, the car slowed down near a back alley in an old industrial district, far from glass towers and polished sidewalks. Julian spotted a dim wooden sign above a tiny shop with peeling paint, Monroe's Repairs, clocks, radios, and broken things. No logos, no glowing windows, just dust and silence. He stepped out of the car, adjusting his expensive coat against the wind. His shoes hit cracked pavement as he approached the door. It creaked when he pushed it open. Inside, it smelled of copper, oil, and forgotten years. Metal scraps were scattered across workbenches. Old gears, screwdrivers, and half-repaired radios littered the shelves. The only sound was the faint tick-tick-tick of wall clocks. Some working, some not. "Hello!" Julian called out. From the back of the shop, a figure emerged. Not a grizzled old man as he expected, but a young woman, barely in her 20s. Her brown hair was tied messily under a stained cap, and her fingers were black with grease. She wiped her hands on a rag, narrowing her eyes at him with a mixture of surprise and indifference. "You look lost," she said, walking toward him. Julian held out the watch. "It's not working." She took it gently, inspected the case with a surprising sense of care, and raised an eyebrow. "This isn't just not working. This is a 1942 Reinhardt mechanical. These don't break easily." Julian said nothing. He just watched her hands. Steady, deliberate, confident. The girl looked up. "You want it fixed?" Julian nodded. "Then you'll have to wait," she said, already turning back toward her bench. "Time takes time." Julian watched in silence as the girl, Eliza, he would later learn, walked back to her cluttered workstation, the gold pocket watch cradled delicately in her calloused fingers. Her gloves were frayed, stained with oil, soot, and time itself. Everything about her seemed chaotic, from the smudge on her cheek to the mismatched socks barely visible beneath her overalls. Yet the way she handled the delicate mechanism was precise, almost surgical. He remained standing, arms crossed, surveying the shop like it was beneath him. "Tell me," he said with a smirk, "do you normally fix heirlooms between changing tires and tuning radios?" Eliza didn't look up. "Only on days that end in Y." Julian's smile tightened, clearly not used to being spoken to like that. "You don't look like someone who knows anything about antique timepieces. And you don't look like someone who knows how to wait," she shot back, her tone even, focused. Julian opened his mouth, then closed it again. She clicked open the back of the watch and examined the gears with a handheld loop. A soft hum escaped her lips. Not amusement, not surprise, but recognition. "These are Swiss-made mainsprings. No rust. The balance wheel's good." She gently rotated a miniature gear. "Someone must have dropped it. That's what caused the second hand to seize." Julian frowned. "How would you know that?" She finally looked up, her eyes calm and a little sharp. "Because I've fixed over 100 watches that people thought were beyond saving." He was quiet again, this time for a different reason. For a brief moment, he didn't see the grime or the chipped paint or the messy curls tucked beneath her cap. He saw skill, focus, pride. Eliza continued working without asking him any questions. She didn't care who he was, what he drove, or how expensive his watch was. And that, more than anything, unnerved him. On the far side of the shop, a small radio buzzed softly, an old jazz tune playing under layers of static. Dust floated in the air like it had nowhere else to be. The only movement was Eliza's fingers, turning tiny screws, resetting coils, testing the tension of a gear spring. Most people don't bring these into places like this, she said quietly. They think small means less, but sometimes the smallest places see the biggest things. Julian didn't respond. He didn't know how to, because for the first time in a long while, he wasn't the smartest person in the room. And oddly, he didn't mind. The silence in the shop was thick, not awkward, but electric. Julian leaned against the edge of a dusty shelf, pretending to browse a row of rusted alarm clocks while secretly watching Eliza work. She adjusted a worn magnifying headset over her eyes, her gloved fingers dancing across the tiny components inside the golden pocket watch. With a soft puff of breath, she cleared a speck of dust from the gear housing, then reached for a pair of tweezers thin enough to thread a needle. To Julian, it looked like chaos, but to her, it was choreography. "What exactly are you doing?" he finally asked, more out of discomfort than curiosity. Eliza didn't look up. "The gear train's intact, but the second pinion slipped off its axis. Whoever last touched this didn't tighten the center wheel. Amateurs always over-oil and under-align." "Excuse me," he said with a half-laugh, "but that last amateur was the top horologist in Manhattan." She gave a short snort, still not making eye contact. "Then you were overcharged." Julian blinked. He wasn't used to being challenged, let alone dismissed, and yet watching her in her element, grease-stained gloves, frizzy hair, intense focus, he found himself strangely impressed. Eliza gently set the final screw, then closed the back panel of the watch with a soft click. She tapped the side of the casing, placed it flat on the workbench, and slowly wound the crown. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. And then, tick, tick, tick. The sound was sharp, steady, alive. Julian straightened, his eyes fixed on the second hand as it swept forward, smooth and continuous. "It's working?" he whispered, as if louder words would scare it back into silence. Eliza peeled off her gloves, laid them beside the bench, and handed the watch back to him. "I told you," she said simply. "Time takes time." Julian held it close to his ear, listening to the rhythmic beat. That ticking, that specific ticking, was one he hadn't heard in over a decade. Not since he was a boy, curled in his mother's lap, watching her wind the same watch before she disappeared from his life entirely. He swallowed hard. "This watch, it hasn't worked properly in years. I've taken it everywhere. No one could fix it. Not a single person." Eliza shrugged. "Then I guess no one listened close enough." There was no bragging in her tone, no prideful smirk, just the quiet confidence of someone who knew their craft and didn't need applause to prove it. Julian looked at her again, this time with genuine curiosity. Who was this girl, and how had she just done in 10 minutes what no luxury boutique could in 10 years? He slipped the watch into his pocket, but the ticking didn't fade. If anything, it was getting louder. Julian stepped out into the cold afternoon light, the repaired watch cradled in his hand like a beating heart. The street was quiet, the city's noise muffled by the alley's cracked walls. He leaned against the hood of his car, ignoring the puzzled look from his driver, and opened the golden lid once more. Not to admire the craftsmanship this time, but to feel something. Something he couldn't yet name. The second hand glided smoothly around its face, ticking in perfect time. A quiet miracle. He turned it over, thumb grazing the edge of the case. The backplate glinted faintly in the sunlight. As he studied the metal, a subtle shimmer caught his eye. Just below the hinge. A faint line. No, a crease. He tilted the watch slightly and his breath caught. There, etched in time-worn cursive, nearly invisible under years of grime and polish, were 6 simple words. "To Catherine, love always." His fingers froze. For a long, suspended moment, everything else fell away. The cold air, the weight of his coat, the hum of the idling engine nearby. His eyes locked onto that name like it had reached up from the past and grabbed him by the throat. Catherine. That name didn't belong to just anyone. It belonged to her, his mother, the woman who had vanished from his life when he was 8 years old, the one person who had ever made time feel soft, who would wind this very watch on the edge of his childhood bed, whispering stories of stars and summer fields and better tomorrows. He thought he had imagined most of it by now, those quiet moments. They had become foggy, unreliable. But now the past had ticked back to life. His legs weakened. He sank slowly into the back seat of the car, the watch still open in his palm. To Catherine, love always. He whispered the words aloud like a prayer or a curse. His assistant, startled by his sudden stillness, turned around from the front. "Mr. Vance, are you all right?" But Julian couldn't speak. The inscription had unlocked something in him, a door he had long nailed shut. And through that door rushed years of silence, grief, and unanswered questions. Why was this watch in that girl's shop? Why now? And more terrifying than all of it, was this really his watch? Or had it simply traveled through the hands of fate to find its way back to him? His grip tightened. He had come for a repair. But what Eliza had handed back to him wasn't just a working watch. It was a ticking memory, a message from a time he had buried. Julian sat alone in the back seat of his car, the golden pocket watch still open in his trembling hands. His breath fogged the window beside him as the driver waited for directions that never came. Catherine. That name wasn't just familiar, it was sacred. Buried deep in the marrow of his memory, sealed away behind years of therapy, silence, and unresolved grief. It was her name, his mother, the one who used to tuck him into bed with lullabies sung off-key, the one who wore gardenia perfume and left tiny notes in his lunchbox, the one who disappeared without a word when he was just 8 years old. He remembered the last time he saw her, standing at the doorway in a beige coat, her eyes red, her lips trembling, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't. She had placed the watch in his tiny hand and closed his fingers over it, whispering, "This will always bring you back to me." And then she was gone. He had been told it was for the best, that she was sick, that she couldn't be a mother anymore. He believed them, or tried to, but the silence never left him. It grew into a void, and that void followed him into adulthood, into boardrooms, into every success he tried to drown himself in. And now the past had the audacity to tick again. Julian snapped the watch shut and stared at the worn leather seat across from him. His reflection in the window looked pale, foreign. The confident CEO had vanished. All that remained was a boy holding a ghost. With a sudden breath, he reached for the car intercom. "Take me back," he said. The driver blinked. "Back, sir?" "To the shop." Eliza was wiping her hands when the bell above the door rang again. She looked up and blinked in surprise. "Back so soon?" Julian didn't respond at first. He walked in slowly, like a man crossing into holy ground. He placed the watch carefully on the counter. "Where did you get this?" Eliza raised an eyebrow. "I didn't. It was already in the shop. Came from the scrap drawer." Julian's eyes narrowed. "That's impossible." She folded her arms. "You asked me to fix a watch. I did. What's this really about?" He hesitated, then opened the lid once more and turned it toward her. She leaned in, squinting at the faded engraving. "To Catherine, love always." Her eyes flicked back to him. "I take it she meant something to you?" "She was my mother," Julian said quietly. "And this was hers." Eliza didn't respond. Not right away. She looked down at the watch again, then back at him, a strange unease crossing her face. "Well," she said softly, "then maybe it didn't end up here by accident." Julian's gaze bore into Eliza like he was trying to extract the truth from behind her eyes. His fingers gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles pale. The watch lay between them, small and quiet, ticking away like it didn't just unravel a man's entire past. "I'm not leaving until you tell me exactly where you got that watch." Eliza tilted her head, her voice steady but firm. "And I'm telling you, I didn't get it. It was already here." "From where?" Julian pressed. "From who?" She sighed and motioned toward the back of the shop. "Mr. Monroe might know. He runs the place. I just fix what he gives me." Julian raised an eyebrow. "You're not the owner?" Eliza gave a half smile. Do I look like the owner of anything? Before he could answer, a small bell rang from the side door as an elderly man emerged. Tall, wiry, wearing thick glasses and suspenders. His hair was silver, and his hands bore the marks of a lifetime spent turning screws and oiling gears. Someone say my name? He asked, his voice dry like parchment. Mr. Monroe, Eliza said. This is a customer. He has questions about that old Reinhardt you gave me last week. Julian straightened, holding the watch gently but firmly in his hand. Do you remember where you got this? Monroe stepped forward, squinting at the timepiece. He took it carefully, inspecting the casing, the chain, the fine engraving inside. For a moment, a flicker of recognition danced behind his glasses. Well, I'll be damned, he murmured. Haven't seen this one in years. Julian leaned in. You do remember it? Monroe nodded slowly. I picked it up at an estate clearance about 5, maybe 6 years ago. Old box of junk. Radios, broken clocks, a few things that didn't look worth the time. This one was tucked beneath a stack of weathered postcards. Estate clearance? Julian echoed. Where? Small house out in Pine Hill. Old woman passed away. No known relatives from what I heard. The crew just wanted the house emptied. Julian's pulse quickened. Did anyone say her name? Monroe shook his head. I don't remember. Wasn't really asking questions. I just bought the lot for scrap. Never thought the watch would tick again. Julian stared at him. Pine Hill. That name wasn't just a place. It was a bruise. A town he hadn't been to in 2 decades. The last place he had seen her. He looked back at Eliza, who was now watching him with something more than curiosity, maybe concern or understanding. Why did you give it to her? Julian asked Monroe. The old man shrugged. Didn't think much of it. She's got the steadiest hands in the shop. If something's broken, she'll find a way. Julian nodded slowly, the pieces clicking in his mind like gears realigning. The watch hadn't just led him to a repair. It had led him back to the beginning. The shop felt suddenly quieter, like the very air had paused to listen. Mr. Monroe stood still, the watch resting delicately in his palm, as if it might shatter under too much pressure. His eyes, clouded by time but sharpened by memory, traced the engraved words once more. To Catherine, love always. Julian leaned in. You said you didn't remember the name of the woman from Pine Hill. Monroe's jaw tensed. His fingers moved over the engraving like reading braille. I didn't, he said softly, until now. He pulled out a wooden stool and sat down slowly, the bones in his knees cracking in protest. The shop's radio buzzed faintly behind him, forgotten for the moment. There was something about her, he began, voice low and worn. She came into my shop once, long before I bought the clearance lot. Must have been 15 years ago, maybe more. I didn't think much of it then. Just another lost soul with a box of broken things. Julian stayed frozen, every muscle in his body tight. She had this shoebox, Monroe continued, filled with scraps, a rusted bracelet, old family photos, a broken radio dial, and this watch. She asked me if I could fix it. I told her I'd try. He paused, staring at the bench in front of him as if watching ghosts. She stayed while I worked, didn't talk much. But when I asked who the watch belonged to, she said it was the only thing left of her son. Said she gave it to him once, and it never found its way back. Julian's breath caught in his throat. She said his name? He asked. Monroe shook his head. Number. But I remember what she did say. She looked me in the eye and said, if this ever ticks again, it means he's alive, and maybe he's still looking for me. Julian's eyes shimmered. Her name, Monroe nodded slowly. That, I do remember. He turned the watch in his hand again. Right before she left, she took a pen and scratched her name on the bottom of the box. Catherine, she wrote, plain and simple. Julian stepped back as if the name had physically hit him. Eliza stood silent at the counter, her brow furrowed, as if she too was starting to see how all the pieces might somehow fit. Her mentor's random box of junk, the engraved watch, the boy who had become a man and now stood on the edge of something he didn't fully understand. She never came back, Monroe added quietly. When she didn't return, I kept the watch. Figured it meant something. He looked up, meeting Julian's eyes. But I had no idea it meant this much. Julian took the watch from Monroe's palm slowly, reverently. It ticked steadily in his hand. Louder now, like it was alive again, like it was calling him forward. Catherine. She had tried to fix the watch before he ever returned, as if she believed, somehow, he would. And now the time between them was shrinking. Julian didn't leave the shop right away. He could have, should have, returned to his polished office tower with floor-to-ceiling glass and filtered air, where espresso came from gold machines and the walls smelled like leather and control. But he didn't. Instead, he found himself pacing slowly through Monroe's repair shop, like a man walking through a museum of a life he'd never known. The air was thick with oil and old wood, the scent oddly comforting. Gears clicked softly on the shelves. Forgotten radios muttered static lullabies from decades past. And under the buzz of a flickering ceiling light, Eliza knelt by a worn bench, tinkering with something that looked more scrap than salvage. The place was a mess, and it was alive. A cracked skylight above let in thin streaks of gray daylight. Rainwater dripped from one corner into a rusted coffee tin with soft, rhythmic plinks. A tattered curtain separated the shop from what looked like a storage room, or maybe a bedroom. Julian wasn't sure. He glanced down at a shelf lined with old tin lunch boxes and cracked thermoses. One was painted with faded sunflowers. Another had a sticker that read, "If it's broken, it still matters." Julian turned to Eliza. "How do you even work like this?" She didn't look up. "What, you mean with my hands or with no budget?" He smirked. "Both." She grinned faintly. "You learn. Grew up fixing things out of necessity, not nostalgia." Julian studied her face. There were no signs of regret in her expression, no hint of wishing for a different life. Just quiet purpose, steady hands, and an ease he hadn't felt in any of the pristine offices or curated charity galas he'd walked through. "People throw everything away these days," Eliza said, reaching for a screwdriver. "Clocks, radios, furniture, even people, all because it's easier to replace than repair." Julian looked down at the watch in his hand. "What if it's too broken?" he asked, the question too honest to be casual. Eliza paused, meeting his eyes. "Nothing's ever too broken. It just needs the right hands." Silence followed, not uncomfortable, but weighty. Julian took a step back, suddenly noticing how clean his coat looked in this place, how foreign his polished shoes felt against the creaking floorboards. He didn't belong here, but somehow he didn't want to leave. This shop, for all its dust and decay, felt more grounded than the towers he had built. Here, things were allowed to crack and still be worth something. As Eliza bent back over her project, Julian leaned against the doorframe and watched. Not as a CEO, not as a man chasing ghosts, just as someone beginning to understand that value wasn't always measured in profit. Sometimes, it ticked softly in the hands of a girl in grease-stained gloves. The rain had settled into a soft, steady rhythm above the skylight, and the shop had grown quieter. Not silent, but calm. The ticking clocks, the faint hum of old wiring, and the occasional creak of the wooden beams above all blended into a kind of mechanical lullaby. Julian was still standing near the workbench, unsure of why he hadn't left yet. Eliza, wiping her hands on a faded cloth, glanced up at the wall clock. "Lunchtime." Julian checked his watch instinctively. Not the pocket one, but the sleek, digital luxury strapped to his wrist. It blinked back at him like it was insulted by the room's rustic charm. "I can have my assistant bring something," he offered reflexively. Eliza raised an eyebrow. "You don't think I eat?" He gave a short laugh. "Honestly, I didn't think you'd have time for it." Without answering, she disappeared behind the curtain at the back of the shop and returned a moment later holding a small metal tin and a chipped mug. She sat cross-legged on the floor between two crates of tangled copper wire and opened the tin to reveal a modest sandwich, just thick bread and something that might have been cheese, and a thermos of tea. She looked up at him expectantly. "You sitting or just observing?" Julian hesitated, then slowly lowered himself onto an overturned milk crate. His coat wrinkled against the rough plastic. But he didn't care. Eliza poured tea into two mismatched mugs. No lemon, no sugar, no artful foam leaf design, just heat and simplicity. She broke the sandwich in half and handed him a piece. Julian blinked. "You're sharing your lunch with me?" "Don't make it weird," she said. "It's just food." He took a bite, surprised by how comforting it was. The bread was rough but fresh, the cheese sharp. But more than the flavor, it was the silence that struck him. Not an awkward one, just honest. For the first time in years, Julian wasn't being pitched an idea, asked for a donation, or photographed through tinted glass. He wasn't a headline, a brand, or a symbol of power. He was just a man, sitting on a crate, eating bread, with someone who didn't care who he was. He glanced at her between sips. "You don't recognize me, do you?" Eliza frowned. "Should I?" "I'm Julian Vance." She shrugged, still not ringing any bells. He let out a soft, genuine laugh, the kind that crept up on him, foreign and unfamiliar. "Everyone wants something from me," he said quietly. "Money, partnerships, favors. No one ever offers me half a sandwich." Eliza smiled, leaning back against a toolbox. "Then maybe you're spending time in the wrong places." He looked at her, eyes narrowing slightly in thought. "Or maybe I've just been late getting to the right ones?" Their eyes met for a beat too long, and in that tiny forgotten shop surrounded by rusted clocks and spare parts, something quietly shifted. Not time, not fate, just two people, finally seen. By Monday morning, the rain had stopped, but something else had started. Julian hadn't returned to his office. The board meetings could wait. For the first time in years, he couldn't. The engraved name had wrapped itself around his thoughts like a vine creeping through old stone. He had let the memory of his mother slip into silence for too long, and now it demanded to be heard again. He needed answers, and surprisingly, Eliza offered to help. They sat side by side at a dusty public records office, the kind with yellowed file folders, flickering fluorescent lights, and the faint smell of mildew clinging to the walls. It was nothing like Julian's usual marble-floored world, but he didn't mind. He had brought a laptop, sleek and silver. She had brought coffee in a cracked thermos and a pencil tucked behind her ear. "Why social services?" Eliza asked as she leafed through a stack of outdated forms. Julian replied without looking up. "After she left, I was told she'd been placed into care, a facility of some kind, but the details were vague, and I never looked deeper, until now." Eliza scanned a file. "You were a kid. That wasn't your job." He paused. "Maybe not, but I still feel like I failed her." There was a long silence, broken only by the rustle of papers and the quiet tapping of keys. Hours passed. They searched everything: foster care records, hospital discharge files, housing assistance logs. Every time a Catherine appeared, Julian's heart skipped, but the dates didn't match. The locations were off. Hope flickered, then faded again and again. Just when Julian leaned back with a sigh, Eliza snapped her fingers. "Here." She slid a worn page toward him. It was a scan of an old intake form from nearly 20 years ago. Name: Catherine V. Status: voluntary admission. Facility: Pine Hill Residential Center. Closed in 2009. Note: patient often speaks of a son, says he carries her watch. Julian's fingers hovered over the paper, like it might vanish if touched too quickly. "She remembered me," he whispered. Eliza looked at him, her voice soft. "Of course she did." He closed his eyes for a second, holding back something sharp in his chest. The kind of ache you don't realize you've been carrying until it suddenly moves. "Pine Hill's not far," she said. "We could go. The building's probably abandoned, but—" Julian opened his eyes. "But something might still be there." Eliza nodded. "Memories have a way of leaving clues." They stood together, the folder clutched between them like a fragile link to a time neither fully understood. Outside, the clouds had finally cleared, and somewhere, just ahead of them, the trail of a forgotten mother was starting to glow again. Not brightly, but enough to follow. It was nearly dusk when they returned to the shop. The golden light filtered in through the cracked skylight, catching particles of dust in midair like a slow, glittering snowfall. Julian moved with purpose now, like a man with direction, but beneath that, a quiet urgency pulsed in his every step, the kind that came from decades of waiting too long. Mr. Monroe was perched on a stool behind the workbench, tinkering with a rusted wall clock when they arrived. He looked up, surprised. Back already? Julian nodded. We found records. Catherine was in Pine Hill, a residential center. Monroe frowned, setting down his tools. Didn't know they kept track that far back. Eliza stepped forward. You said you got the watch from a box, right? Do you still have the rest of it? Monroe's eyes squinted behind his glasses, then drifted toward a high shelf in the corner of the shop. Maybe. I never toss much. He stood slowly, climbed a creaky wooden step stool, and reached into the clutter. After a few minutes of rummaging, he pulled down a dusty shoebox bound with an old leather strap. He set it gently on the table and removed the lid. Inside, a faded silk handkerchief, a broken hairpin, a photo with its corners curling inward, and at the bottom, a bundle of yellowed envelopes tied together with twine. Julian leaned in. Monroe untied the string and began flipping through them. Most were blank on the front. A few had dates, 2006, 2007, all written in the same delicate, looping handwriting. He opened one carefully. It began. Dear Eliza, today, I saw a little girl fixing a broken toy on the sidewalk. I thought of you. Julian's eyes darted to Eliza, who blinked in confusion. Wait, what? Monroe looked up slowly. Didn't know your name was in here. He handed the letter to Eliza, who took it with trembling fingers. She read aloud. I used to watch from across the street. You never noticed me. I didn't want to scare you. But I liked knowing you were okay, that you were building things, fixing things. I always hoped someday someone would fix you too. Catherine Eliza's voice broke at the end. Her lips parted, but no words came. Julian stepped closer. She knew you. I don't remember anyone watching me, Eliza whispered. I was just a kid on the street back then, always outside, always fixing something I found in the trash. Julian gently took the letter from her hands and looked at the signature again. Catherine. This wasn't just his story anymore. This woman, this ghost, had been quietly orbiting both their lives, watching, remembering, leaving pieces behind, like breadcrumbs across time. There were 5 more letters in the bundle, each one addressed to Eliza. None of them had been mailed. Eliza looked up at Julian, her voice barely a whisper. Why would she write to me? Julian's answer came without hesitation. Because maybe you were the only part of her story she still had the strength to love out loud. The letters had changed everything. They sat on the workbench now, gently fanned out like fallen leaves, each one carefully written in the same delicate hand, each word soaked in a quiet ache. Julian read them one by one as Eliza paced in slow circles near the window, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold in memories she hadn't known she owned. Why would she write all these to me? Eliza whispered again, as if saying it louder might break the illusion. Mr. Monroe cleared his throat from the other side of the room. I think I might know. Both heads turned toward him. The old man rubbed his temples and exhaled. It was years ago. I didn't remember it until just now. Back when you first started hanging around the shop, quiet, covered in soot, fixing broken toys from the junk bins. A woman came in asking about you. Julian stood. What did she say? Monroe looked at Eliza. She asked if you had family, said she'd seen you outside every day, fixing radios like they were priceless. She said she saw something of her son in you. Eliza's voice was small. Did she give a name? Number. But she gave me a phone number, said she was looking into adoption, that she wanted to give someone a second chance she'd never been able to give herself. Julian froze. Eliza blinked fast. Adoption? Monroe nodded. But a few weeks later, she came back, looking worse, tired, thinner, said things had changed, that she wasn't fit to take anyone in. She left without giving details, just asked me to make sure you stayed warm that winter. Eliza slowly sat down, as if her legs had forgotten how to hold her. I thought I was alone, she murmured. I thought no one ever saw me. Julian knelt in front of her, holding out one of the letters again. She saw you. She tried. Something stopped her, but she never forgot. Tears slipped silently down Eliza's cheeks. Not loud, not messy, just real. All this time, I thought I was just a kid in the corner of the world. But she was watching. Not just watching, Julian said gently. She was hoping. Eliza wiped her face with the sleeve of her worn shirt and looked up. Why do you think she didn't go through with it? Julian hesitated. Maybe she was too sick. Or maybe she was afraid of breaking someone else. Eliza nodded slowly. But she left the letters. Julian smiled faintly. Maybe that was her way of saying she still believed in second chances. They sat in silence, the sound of ticking clocks surrounding them like a soft heartbeat. For years, Eliza had thought she was no one's child, a shadow in the city. But now, she realized someone had once looked at her and thought, you deserve to be chosen. And even if fate hadn't allowed it then, maybe now something broken had started to mend. The letters stayed on the workbench for days, untouched but never ignored. Each time Julian visited the shop, his eyes would drift toward them. Each time Eliza walked past them, her hand would hover for a moment before she pulled it back, like the paper still burned with something unspoken. Neither of them said it aloud, but they both felt it. Something had changed. Julian had stopped wearing suits, at least not in the shop. Now it was rolled-up sleeves, his tie stuffed in his coat pocket, and grease smudges he didn't bother wiping off. Eliza didn't ask why he kept coming back, and he never asked why she let him. That afternoon they sat side by side again, not at a desk or a computer, but cross-legged on the wooden floor. Between them was a half-dismantled grandfather clock, its insides scattered like puzzle pieces. Julian picked up a gear, turning it in his fingers. I used to think legacy meant buildings with your name on them. Eliza raised an eyebrow. And now? He glanced at her. Now I think it means leaving something behind that keeps moving, even when you don't. Eliza smiled faintly, reaching for the pendulum. Like a watch. He nodded. Or a girl with oil on her hands and more heart than half the people I know. She rolled her eyes but didn't deny it. There was something unspoken between them now, a tenderness too raw to name. Not romance, not yet, but a recognition, a mirrored ache, the knowledge that they were both, in their own ways, survivors of something they never chose. Julian looked at her, really looked. At first I thought the watch led me here by chance. Now I'm not so sure. Eliza was quiet for a moment, then said, maybe your mom didn't just leave behind memories. Maybe she left breadcrumbs. He smiled. And you were one of them. Eliza glanced down at the half-assembled clock. It's strange, isn't it? We're not related. Not by blood, not by name, but somehow, Julian finished her sentence, and our stories fit together. She looked up, eyes soft. Maybe healing doesn't always come from where you expect it. Maybe sometimes it comes from someone just showing up. Julian leaned back against the wall, arms resting on his knees. For years, I thought no one could understand what I lost. And now here you are, reminding me it wasn't just my loss. They sat in that stillness, two people who had once felt like broken parts, and realized they were quietly becoming each other's repair. Because some connections aren't born in blood, they're born in silence, in shared pain, in showing up again and again. Julian didn't sleep that night. The letters echoed in his head, Catherine's words looping like a lullaby sung off key. If this ever ticks again, it means he's alive. But what if she was the one still alive? The thought clawed at him as he sat at his apartment window, the city stretching beyond the glass like a sleeping giant. The lights below sparkled like the stars Catherine used to whisper stories about. He remembered being small, curled up beside her, as she spoke of constellations and time, like they were promises she intended to keep. He had to know the truth. All of it. The next morning, Julian returned to the Public Records building alone. The archive clerk recognized him this time. The man with too many questions and not enough answers. I'm looking for a death certificate, Julian said, his voice steadier than he felt. Name, Catherine Vance. Date of death, sometime after 2009. The clerk typed slowly, then frowned. One record found. Deceased. Catherine Vance. Death listed as natural causes. Dated 2014. Julian exhaled sharply. Too recent. He asked to see the file. The clerk handed over a printed scan. Julian's eyes darted across the page. Date of death, March 14th, 2014. Place, Pine Hill County Hospital. ID confirmed by staff member, initials only, LH. His brows furrowed. LH. He flipped the page. No full name. No contact. No official family listed. Under next of kin, the line was blank. He stared at the document. Something didn't sit right. If Catherine had died in a hospital, why wasn't Julian ever notified? He may have been estranged, but he was still legally connected. The system should have found him. He had been in every database money could buy into. And LOH. Why just initials? His fingers tightened around the page. Someone had claimed to know her and signed her out of life without anyone else being told. Later that day, Julian returned to the shop with the printout in hand. Eliza was working on a broken metronome, but looked up when he walked in. You found something? She asked. Julian nodded slowly and handed her the paper. She scanned the lines, eyes narrowing. LH. You think it's a staff member? Maybe, he said, or maybe someone who wanted her to disappear quietly. Eliza glanced at him. You don't believe she's dead. I don't know what to believe, but my gut says this isn't over. She leaned on the counter. Then we keep looking. Julian smiled faintly. You say that like we're partners in a mystery novel. Eliza grinned. We kind of are. They stood together in the golden afternoon light, the paper between them, the ticking clocks around them like quiet applause. Julian no longer felt like a man haunted by the past. He felt like someone chasing the future, with someone beside him who wasn't afraid of what they might find. And somewhere, hidden beneath years of silence and redacted records, the truth was still ticking. It took less than an hour to drive there, but for Julian, it felt like crossing a lifetime. Pine Hill Station hadn't changed much. The walls still wore the same pale blue paint, cracked in all the same places. The benches were iron and cold. The roof still leaked near the east platform, but time had drained the place of its weight. It was quieter now, less alive, as if the world had moved on and left it behind. Eliza stepped out of the car beside him, scarf wrapped tight around her neck. You okay? Julian nodded once. This is the last place I saw her. He didn't need to explain who her was. He led her inside, footsteps echoing down the tiled corridor. It smelled of rain, rust, and old coffee. His eyes scanned the space, drawn to the benches on the far wall. His heart beat faster. There, he said, pointing to the far end. She stood there, beige coat, hair pinned back. She held the watch and smiled at me like she wanted to freeze the moment. Eliza followed him silently. She gave me the watch right before she got on the train, Julian continued. I thought she was coming back. I believed she was coming back. His voice wavered, but he didn't stop. He sat down on the same bench, running his hand along the cold metal. I used to dream about this place. I'd sit right here in my sleep, waiting, hoping she'd walk off the next train. Eliza sat beside him, her presence steadying. Then through the faint hum of the station's old speakers and the distant screech of brakes, something broke through. Not loud, not clear, but real, a whisper, barely audible. Julian! He turned his head sharply. The corridor was mostly empty. A couple passed by. A conductor gave a nod. But near the far corner, an old woman stood near the vending machine, slight, hunched, her coat too big for her frame. She wasn't looking at him, but her lips had moved, and he knew that voice. Julian stood slowly, heart pounding in his ears. Did you hear that? He asked Eliza. I think so. He took a cautious step forward, but the woman had already turned away, heading toward the exit with a soft shuffle. Eliza, he said, eyes fixed. That was her. You don't know that. He shook his head. I do. They moved through the station, weaving past pillars and benches, but by the time they reached the exit, the woman was gone, swallowed by the crowd, or maybe the years. Julian stopped just outside the door, chest rising and falling, eyes scanning every face that passed. Eliza stepped beside him. Even if it wasn't her, you heard her. He looked at her, breathless. What if she's still here? Eliza didn't answer, because deep down, she believed it too. And in that moment, beneath the faded arch of the station entrance, Julian realized something. He hadn't come back to a memory. He had come back to a possibility. The next morning, the city felt quieter. Julian had barely slept. The whisper from the station echoed in his head. Soft, fleeting, but unforgettable. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her turning away, vanishing into the crowd like a dream just out of reach. He needed time to think. So Eliza offered him something simple. Let me walk. He nodded, trusting her in a way he didn't fully understand. Sometimes she seemed to know where things would lead. Not because of logic, but because of something quieter. Something like instinct. Eliza found herself wandering into the older part of Pine Hill, where the sidewalks cracked and the grass grew tall between the bricks. The park there was small, tucked between forgotten row houses and an abandoned library, but it held something still. The trees whispered gently in the wind. A broken swing creaked in the distance, and then she saw her. A woman sat alone on a bench beneath a willow tree, her back curved like the branches above her. She wore a soft gray coat, buttoned wrong, and a knitted scarf that had unraveled at one end. Her silver hair was pulled into a loose knot, and her face, though turned away, carried the quiet weight of years lived in silence. Eliza slowed her steps, not sure why her heart had started beating faster. Then she saw it. Around the woman's neck hung a thin, rusted chain. At the end of it, a small pendant, oval-shaped, aged, engraved with two simple letters. J.V. Eliza froze. Her breath caught. She took a cautious step forward, then another, gravel crunching softly beneath her boots. The woman didn't turn. She was watching the ducks float on the small pond in front of her, hands clasped tightly in her lap, as if holding herself together. "Excuse me," Eliza said gently, her voice nearly trembling. The woman looked up, slowly with cloudy eyes that seemed to blink in the slow recognition. Her expression remained unreadable, but her fingers reached instinctively toward the pendant, gripping it tightly, protectively. Eliza's mouth went dry. "Where did you get that necklace?" The woman didn't speak. Instead, she smiled, faint, distant, like someone who remembered the warmth of a fire even if she couldn't find the flame. And then she whispered, "Julian." Eliza felt the earth tilt beneath her feet. The name didn't come with urgency or fear. It came like a memory returning gently to its rightful place. "You know him?" Eliza asked, kneeling slightly to meet her gaze. "Julian Vance?" The woman nodded, barely, and looked back at the pond as if watching the past float by. Eliza's hands trembled. She fumbled for her phone. "I need to call someone." But before she could dial, the woman reached out and touched her wrist. "No rush," she whispered. "He'll come. He always finds what matters." The clouds had gathered low over Pine Hill by the time Julian arrived at the park. The wind carried a soft chill, and the first droplets of rain began to fall as he stepped out of the car. He didn't bring an umbrella. He barely remembered to close the door behind him. Eliza stood near the willow tree, her eyes meeting his the second he stepped onto the path. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She simply pointed to the bench. And there, hunched, still, hands folded tightly around a rusted pendant, sat the woman he had chased across decades of silence. Catherine. His breath hitched. She was older than he remembered, her frame smaller, more fragile. Her hair was silver, not soft brown. Her coat too large for her shoulders. But there, in the tilt of her chin, in the way her fingers fidgeted with the pendant, there she was, his mother. Julian took a step forward, then another, then stopped. What do you say to someone who gave you everything and then disappeared? What do you say when time has built a wall between you, brick by unspoken brick? He swallowed hard. Mom? Her head turned, slowly like a clock's hour hand finding its place. Her eyes blinked once, twice, and then they lit up, not all at once, not bright, but real. Julian, she whispered, his name, fragile on her tongue, cracked something wide open inside him. Tears welled up instantly. He stepped closer, falling to his knees in front of her, as the rain began to fall harder, soaking his shirt, running down his face, mixing with the tears he didn't try to hide. She reached out a trembling hand, fingers brushing his cheek. "You're taller than I remember." He let out a broken laugh, holding her hand to his face like it might vanish if he let go. "I looked for you," he said. "I thought you were gone. I thought—" She shushed him gently, her voice paper-thin. "I tried to come back. I wrote. I watched. But I wasn't strong. I thought staying away would hurt you less." He shook his head. "It hurt anyway." The rain soaked through their clothes, but neither moved. Eliza stood nearby, motionless, watching a moment that didn't belong to her, but somehow had always included her. Catherine smiled, though her eyes were already glazing again, flickers of clarity fading in and out. "I used to sit by your bed," she murmured, "and tell you stories about time, about how it never really ends, just loops back." Julian nodded, his forehead resting against her knees now. "You were right. Time brought me back to you. And there, under a gray sky and weeping clouds, time finally did what it hadn't in years. It healed. The rain didn't stop. It softened into a mist that clung to the air like breath on glass." Catherine had been taken gently back to the care center just outside Pine Hill. She'd smiled the whole way, humming an old tune no one quite recognized. Julian had walked beside her, silent, never letting go of her hand, not even for a moment. Now, hours later, he stood back in Monroe's shop, his hair still damp, coat draped over a chair. Eliza was at the workbench, gently rewinding an old metronome, but her hands paused the moment she heard his footsteps behind her. She turned. His eyes were tired, not from exhaustion, but from something far deeper. Release. Julian reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the golden pocket watch. It ticked quietly in his palm, steady and sure. He held it out toward her, not to return it, but to show it. "This," he said, voice soft, "was never broken." Eliza tilted her head, confused. Julian continued, stepping closer. The gears were fine. The case was worn, yes, but intact. The hands still knew their path. It only stopped because it didn't know where it belonged anymore. He looked up, locking eyes with her. "But it wasn't the watch that was broken," he said. "It was me." Eliza's lips parted slightly. Julian smiled, not the practiced smile of a CEO, but the kind a boy gives when he finally finds his way home. "And you fixed me." Eliza lowered her eyes, the weight of his words sinking in. "All I did was wind it." "No," he said gently. "You listened. You didn't see it as a piece of junk or a collector's item. You felt what it meant. You looked at it like it mattered, and it started ticking again." He paused, then added, "So did I." Eliza swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to fix you." Julian chuckled quietly. "The best repairs are the unintentional ones." They stood in silence, the only sound the quiet ticking from the watch in his hand. It wasn't just a timepiece anymore. It was a testament, a witness to what had been lost and found again. Eliza reached out, brushing her fingers lightly over the watch's surface. "It's still a little scratched," she murmured. Julian nodded. "So am I." Their hands lingered, not grasping, just resting near each other, like two gears aligned at last. "I thought this was just about finding my mother," he said. "But somewhere along the way, I found something else." "What?" He looked at her, eyes warm. "Hope." 3 months later, a new sign was unveiled on a quiet street corner in Pine Hill. Sleek metal letters, polished to a soft shine, stretched across a glass storefront framed by clean brick and warm wood. Above the door, in bold serif, "Heart Precision," where time is repaired and stories continue. Inside, the space was nothing short of extraordinary. Long wooden workbenches lined the walls, each fitted with state-of-the-art magnifying scopes, micro gear kits, and restoration tools most repair shops could only dream of. But there were also old things, personal things, like a framed photo of a young Eliza working beside a battered radio, and a wall-mounted clock from Monroe's original shop that still ticked, proudly uneven. The place wasn't sterile, it was alive, and at its heart stood Eliza Hart. Wearing a navy apron embroidered with her name, grease under her nails and confidence in her step, she moved between workstations like she belonged, because finally she did. Julian stood by the front counter, watching her with quiet pride. He hadn't just funded the lab. He'd named it, not after himself, not after his company, but after her. Eliza didn't just fix a watch, he had said during the opening ceremony. She fixed me. And in doing so, she reminded me that the smallest gears make the biggest movements. Heart precision exists because sometimes what the world throws away still matters. The press had shown up expecting a polished tech mogul story. They got something else. They got her. The girl with grease-stained gloves who once repaired heirlooms in a leaking shop now taught apprentices how to steady their hands and sharpen their hearts. High school students from struggling neighborhoods came in after class. Retired machinists dropped by just to listen. Some days Eliza would give away repairs for free. Other days, she'd sit with someone for hours just trying to get a ticking back. Because heart precision didn't just restore things, it restored people. That afternoon, as the final guest left, Julian handed Eliza a small velvet box. "Open it," he said. Inside was the golden pocket watch, restored, polished, still ticking. But now the inside lid had a new engraving beneath the original. Fixed by E.H., with care, not tools. Eliza smiled, eyes misty. "You didn't have to do this." Julian shook his head. "I didn't. I wanted to. Because some people spend their whole lives trying to be seen. And you made the world look closer." She held the watch to her chest and whispered, "Thank you." Julian stepped back, glancing at the busy room around them. "Don't thank me. You built this." And for the first time in her life, Eliza didn't feel like a repair girl in the shadows. She felt like proof that broken things and people could not only be fixed, but become something even better than before. The house wasn't big. A modest place nestled at the edge of Pine Hill, where the trees stretched tall and the wind always seemed to carry a hush of memory. The porch creaked when stepped on. The windows fogged easily in the mornings. But it was warm, lived in, real. Inside, laughter floated from the kitchen. Catherine sat at the small round table by the window, wrapped in a soft knitted shawl, her fingers curled around a steaming cup of chamomile tea. Her hair was neatly brushed, her eyes cloudy but calm, like the sky before spring. Across from her sat Julian, sleeves rolled, smile relaxed. No boardroom weight in his shoulders, no headlines behind his eyes. Just a sun, finally still. Eliza brought over a plate of biscuits and gently set it down. "Don't eat them all at once," she teased. "They're barely edible." Catherine gave a soft chuckle. "Then they're perfect." They sat like that, the three of them, sipping, talking, sometimes silent. Not because there was nothing to say, but because sometimes words were too small for what time had done. On the side table nearby, the golden pocket watch rested atop a folded cloth napkin. It ticked steadily, softly, like it had never stopped at all. Every now and then, Julian would glance at it, not to check the time, but to feel it, to hear it, because that sound wasn't just mechanics anymore. It was proof that some things could pause without being lost. Catherine sipped her tea and looked out the window. "I remember when you were small," she said softly. "You always wanted to know how things worked. You once took apart the toaster because it didn't pop fast enough." Julian laughed. "Took me 3 hours to put it back together." "You never did," she smirked. They all laughed, and for a moment, it felt like time folded in on itself. Like past and present shook hands across the table. Eliza leaned back, quietly watching them. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. She had been the bridge, the steady hands, the unlikely beginning to a reunion no one saw coming. Julian reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" Eliza asked. "For choosing to fix something, instead of walking away." Outside, the light softened into gold as the day prepared to end. But inside, life kept ticking. Not in a rush, not behind schedule. Just right. Because healing doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it's tea on a quiet afternoon, a watch that ticks again, and the simple truth that what's lost can be found. The end. A story of broken things and the girl who brought them back to life.